How's it going, friends? On today's video, we're talking about everything you need to know about buying and or building a brand new home in Minnesota. Stick around. How's it going, friends? My name is Jesse Lynch. This is Nick Host. I run the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called To the Twin Cities. You can check out our website, tothetwincities.com. But this YouTube channel is all about helping you find a place to call home here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. And relocations is what we do. It's what we focus on. It's what we spend all of our time thinking about, solving problems for, etc. And it's what we do better than anybody else. So if that's of interest to you, then do me a favor, do Nick a favor, do yourself a favor. Subscribe to this channel. Click that little bell to get notified so you can see when these videos are coming out. And yeah, we put out a lot of videos and we dive deeper than anybody dives on any of these topics. And if you're interested in working with us, go to our website, tothetwincities.com. We have a contact form there that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less. Yeah, and then we'll reach out to you. We'll get the show on the road, and pretty soon you'll probably be talking to one of us on Zoom. But yeah, today we're talking about things that you need to know about buying a new home in Minnesota, the concept of a new build. There's a lot to know. So first things first, I think a lot of people think that you don't have to have a real estate agent to buy a new home, and that's true. You do not need a real estate agent to buy a home, but I like to say that you can also represent yourself in court, right? But like technically you can, it's your right to do so, but that could definitely get you into some big trouble, and you could definitely end up spending a lot more money if you choose not to have that representation. So that's kind of the first thing, and we're not going to harp on that too much, and we'll talk a little bit more about sort of like what our role would be in a new build in a little bit. And also, it's probably noisy. We know there's a lot of construction going on outside of our office.
How fitting.
Yeah, you can't control it. They're literally like demolishing the road in front of our office right now, and so it's going to be a little bit noisy. But hopefully, it's tolerable on your end. And yeah,
it's not a soundtrack.
Yeah. And it's also not necessarily that normal, right? It's not that our city is actually that loud.
No.
We have thin windows, and they are literally probably 20 feet away from us doing this stuff.
And 124 years old.
Yeah, definitely.
First of all, just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. There can be two schools of thought where new builds are concerned. Some people really like the idea, oh, it's new, it's great, everything's going to be functioning as it should, which in theory would be the idea. And then the other school of thought, I think, of run into folks who think this way as well, is they don't make them like they used to kind of idea, in that existing construction has been around for this long, and especially like the refrigerators and the other appliances of the 60s and 70s, that type of thing. So the craftsmanship can vary widely with new builds, some certainly better than others.
Yeah, I would say that it's certainly there's some truth to that they don't build them like they used to, but I would say it just varies really dramatically. The old homes have been standing for a long time, right? If you have a 100-year-old home, it's like, well, it's probably mostly settled at this point, right? Most of those quirks have arrived, right? And they're there for better or worse. On a new build, there's going to be some discovery of those things. What are the weak points? It's a brand new home, and you're going to slowly discover the weak points, the flaws over time. It might look immaculate right when you take possession, but it's going to eventually, those little things, they're going to show themselves, and they might be fairly superficial, but they will show up. And then you also have, a new build. The beauty to me of a new build is that the major systems are new, right? The HVAC system, the roof, the windows, those things ought to be functional, and the foundation ought to be, absolutely pristine. But that's not always the case. You can take possession of a new build, move into a new build, and then you realize that like one of the windows doesn't crank open because the way they installed it just wasn't, they didn't nail it.
There's a nature of unprovenness to it. Like, yeah, it's new and it should function, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, you're the one who's going to find out where those little things
We've seen a lot of
up.
like new houses, I would say under 10 years old, and sometimes even 5 to 8, where you get in there and you go, whoa,
yeah,
is this the people that were living in it being tough on it, or is this just
yeah,
materials and workmanship?
And
I've seen some gnarly carpet after like 5 years.
Yeah.
You're like, this is 5-year-old carpet?
Yeah, and I would say for sure it's both. There is a varying quality of build and materials used, but there are certain people, certain clients we help from certain areas who are very averse to new builds because maybe they're coming from a place that has a really bad reputation of like really bad build quality. I've seen some of those houses. It's true. They suck. They're like weak little shells of a home. And
we get a lot of it from specifically coastal areas where populations are booming to a greater degree than they are here in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
And southwestern areas where places where growth exploded, and so then quality control went down.
Absolutely out the window.
Yeah.
I've seen some interesting videos of home inspectors online.
Yeah.
Where it's downright scary. But luckily we feel like we're mostly insulated from that up here, but the point remains.
Yeah.
So.
And I think another thing for you to be aware of is the idea that communication with a builder, if you are unrepresented, it can not always be the easiest. You'll find that there's kind of varying levels of service. Early on, there's maybe a little bit of pizzazz that you'll get, and you'll be like, wow, oh, they're really taking care of me. Then once you're in the process and the process has started, for one, then you might not be dealing with, let's say, a customer service specialist, right, or the agent representing the sale. Now you're dealing with like a project manager who might be a bit more gruffy, right? They might not really be.
You might have more on their plate.
Yeah, and they might know that maybe you're concerned about something that is going to get taken care of, right? And they're like, yeah, we know, right? They might get really annoyed by that, but that they shouldn't, in my opinion. They should know that they're probably working with somebody who's never gone through a build, but they might go, yeah, we know that doesn't look good right now. It will look good when it's done, but you can get some attitude, I think, along the way, but you'll see it sort of change.
It's like with existing construction. The builder and their team are the seller, obviously, and it's just nice to have a buffer, aka us, in between to advocate for you and oftentimes be the squeaky wheel and be a little bit more stern on your behalf, even if it's just to get answers. Even if things are going to get buttoned up, they will get taken care of. Mm-hmm. We're happy to be there to just make sure that point is driven home.
Yeah, and I think there are certain things that maybe we can look at, through a lens of having gone through this many times, and we might be able to say, rather than even asking the project manager, we might be able to say, oh, that looks like that because of this, right? I could imagine a scenario where the tile floor in a bathroom, some builders will actually they'll drop the floor down in a bathroom because they want the wood floor and the tile floor to be exactly the same height, which is great and like high-end new build stuff. That's not something the cheaper builders are doing. But when you look at it, if you don't know what's going on, you might be like, why are these floors uneven? It might be a cause for concern, but that's just like a little example of something where we can say like, oh, actually that's intentional. That's so that it looks flat and flush, and you might not even have to escalate that up the flagpole. One thing I think is really important for you to know is that you should prepare yourself for a delay. You can pretty safely bet that whatever date the builder says this is the move-in date, it's not going to be that. They're maybe a bit optimistic on those timelines, but just be prepared for it. Don't make it where you are without a home, on the date of closing, because it's not going to be that date.
Allow for a buffer, both physically and mentally, and logistically.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
Reasons for that, a lot of times they'll have change orders for materials, back orders for materials. There's oftentimes a clause in the new build contract as well, which is worth knowing, that the builder reserves the right to basically switch out the material as long as the effective usage of the property and the look, the aesthetics aren't materially changing, which can be kind of a off-putting or sobering thing for a buyer to get to a build site and be like, oh, whoa, this is not what I was expecting,
Yeah,
or
things
this is
are just slightly off. Yeah.
not exactly what the rendering was depicting. So
Yeah.
these are all things that can change the timeline.
Yeah, they'll change the timeline, and they also could very well change the aesthetic, right? There could be slight variations in those things, and that is within the right of the builder for most things. That said, there are custom builders where the homes are probably going to cost more, but where you help select every single cosmetic piece that you probably don't want to, in my opinion. That's kind of annoying for you, but there are some builders and some homes from builders that are at certain points, you have a higher level of maybe autonomy or a higher level of control over what gets selected. Things that come to mind are like bathtubs. Let's say there's, I don't know, some bathtub that's kind of a square shape, and that one is gone. That supply no longer exists. The builder might end up, you might have something that has a little bit more of a curved look, right? And it's like the builder's like, well, sure, but this is within the variance or variation, sorry. And there's really nothing that you can do about that.
Yeah.
That is something that you agree to if you sign that kind of a thing. Same with toilet.
The analogy that we drew was like if you ever order food with Instacart, and it's out of stock, they'll switch it with the next best thing and be like, here you go.
Yeah. Except in this case, you might. On Instacart, you could say...
You could give a thumbs up or a thumbs
down. But this you might not be able to. You might just walk in, at some point along the process and go, oh, that toilet looks different, than the toilet that I remember seeing.
And by and large, this
countertop.
This has to do with developments where it's not exactly custom. They'll have these packages of finishes that you can select, and you'll be able to pick through those, but sometimes something will just be out, or they'll switch it out.
I mean, if they're building,
if you're doing
100 homes in a metropolitan area, they might be one short,
But if you're going with more of a one-off or a smaller kind of niche, higher end development, those timelines can be longer if you're willing to wait to have those specific materials ordered.
Yeah.
So throughout the process, you'll have the opportunity to do a pre-drywall walkthrough, which we feel is very important for many reasons. You'll have the opportunity, and we recommend that you go through and take photos and video to note locations of studs, plumbing, electrical, these types of things. So once the drywall is hung, you'll have an idea of where those things are, so you can hang things with relative ease, know which areas to avoid so you're not drilling into any electrical or plumbing lines, things of that nature. And also, my folks built a townhouse where they ended up going in and kind of removing some of the drywall to create some little storage spaces as well. So something worth noting. There can be a lot of dead space in some of these builds. It's definitely something we recommend. And then also having a pre-drywall inspection, having an inspector come out. I know that the city typically will do that, but for your own peace of mind, it's never a bad idea to have someone come out, make sure that everything's being done above board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually had a pre-drywall walkthrough, not inspection in this case, where we were, everything looked good until we got to the primary bathroom, and then there was one very specific layout that it's the reason they bought the home. Like literally they were like, this primary bathroom is very exciting to us, the idea that we could get this in our budget and all that. And where it just had kind of a step-in shower, no door or anything like that. Yeah, it was very nice. And we did the sort of the framing walkthrough, the pre-drywall walkthrough, and it was framed up for kind of a more modest, just kind of normal tub. And that was something we got to say, hey, that's not right. And they were like, okay, yeah, we'll fix it. And it wasn't a big deal at that point. Yeah. It would have been, had certainly had plumbing gone in or anything like that. But that's a just make sure that you're being thorough with that. And I would say take documentation as well. Not necessarily like for legal proof, although maybe that would be helpful, but more so for your reference later on. Because maybe you could look at the blueprints, but do you know how to read blueprints?
And also, just as it relates to inspections in general, you might get some pushback from builders, but again, we're there to advocate for you. It's just having an inspection, just a general inspection performed prior to closing to make sure that everything is good. We had a good friend of ours that built a home, and there was some insulation that was missed above the attic space in the garage, and they actually ended up having some pipes that froze. Thankfully, didn't burst, but pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And it just got missed. The builder did address it promptly, which was great.
Yeah.
That was awesome, but it could have been so much worse.
And it's a perfect example of a builder might say, well, the city inspects this, so like, why would you even do this? It's like, well, the inspector didn't catch that. You know, the truth
Somebody
is,
signed off on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the inspectors that we use in particular, there's just a level of they'll go into places that maybe the city inspector wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, they'll crawl into crawl spaces, they'll crawl into attics in a way that not necessarily everybody will. And also, there is a level of when you just are looking at a house that's framed, it is weird. It looks crazy. And it can be really difficult to really get a sense of things. And it can be hard to know what is good or what's right or what's wrong because it's just strange. There's no concept of room sizes and things like that. And you don't know, unless you're a structural engineer or something like that, but like you don't know where, you know, what like the appropriate amount of support would be in a particular place, or what's a typical stud pattern, or let's say a joist pattern, right?
Yeah.
Whereas an inspector should have a good idea of how things ought to be put together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most people don't see a home being built. The vast majority of people are buying existing construction, even if it is a completed spec home.
Yeah.
You don't really get to see the guts of it, so to speak.
Yeah.
It is a different thing. And that said, throughout the process, you know, we've had multiple people that have kind of felt a little uneasy about how it looks, you know, throughout. But we always reassure folks, you know, we've seen the model homes, you know what this will look like ultimately, and it has always ended up being that way, where it's kind of cool. It's like baking a cake.
Yeah.
At the end, you're like, wow, this really came together. Even if you're only a week out, sometimes what they can get done in a week's time can be pretty impressive. So
and it's those finishing pieces. It's like the trim and just these final touches that really do make a room, even just simplify it to a bedroom and make it feel much more put together. You know, otherwise, it feels very, very incomplete. Even if it's only, you know, one worker, you know, 4 hours of work, it could look like, wow, this room is not even close to done.
And also, something that a lot of people have probably heard of, but up to a week and even a few days prior to close, you'll do what's called a blue tape walkthrough with the builder or the representative, where you go through and just you're kind of nitpicking the fit and finish.
Yep.
The chips in the drywall, you know, the paint, the areas that need touch-up paint, etc. So you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. And by the time you actually close, it should be looking pretty tight.
It should be really quite tidy. Or they'll say, you know, if you catch something a little bit bigger, it'll have to be something that they're going to have to get done
post-closing.
Yeah, which is not fun for anybody, but it's like, well, it's that or you don't move in, you know. And some contracts are written as such where this place is livable, you have to close. You can't push it. You can't necessarily push out closing to do some final cosmetic stuff from the blue tape walkthrough. Some contracts won't allow that. They'll say like, well, no, you have to close, and then we will take care of that after.
Thankfully, we've never run into anything major, and most people are okay with that. And we've heard good things about builders following up on that, at least up here. So,
and at least with the builders that we've worked with and that we've helped people look into, which actually I think that's a really good point. Our friend with the insulation problem, that would fall into a warranty situation, and there are warranties that come with a new build home, and that's one of the biggest sort of peace of mind elements of a new build. With any new build home in Minnesota, there are fundamentally 4 tiers or chronological timelines where you have different warranties.
Yeah, warrantable items.
Yeah.
First is going to be your 1-year warranty. This is typically going to include workmanship defects. Again, those fit and finish items. You're talking settling cracks, cracking in the ceiling, trim, smaller things like that.
Nail pops.
Yeah, nail pops. That's a big one. Great point.
Yeah.
Year 2 is going to be your electrical, HVAC, plumbing, siding, more caulking, windows, doors, stuff like that. Year 5 is actually going to be what's called the envelope of the building, and any places that are considered water penetrations, so insulation, stuff like that. And then year 10 is going to be structural, so foundation, trusses, floor joists, stuff like that. Anything that could potentially make the home unsafe. So you've kind of got these, again, 1, 2, 5, and 10 year chronological warranty kind of
and just to
milestones.
Just to clarify, that means that you have 1 year for when he says you have 1 year, that means that in the first year you have to address all of those things with the builder. Within there's a 2-year time period, and you have to make sure that any of those, the HVAC, those things are handled in the first 2 years, and then again the 5 years. That means that you have that much time to sort of pursue these changes with the builder, and then again 10 years. So,
or if they've presented themselves,
yes,
they would be covered. But yeah, and we've had clients say this before. Again, you kind of have to be on them about it. They will fulfill their commitment to do those things, but they're not necessarily going to go out of their way to be, Johnny on the spot with it.
Yeah, and I would say, there's a 1 year walkthrough that very reliably. There's a 1 year walkthrough where they're going to, in the same way that there's the blue tape walkthrough before close, pretty much every builder I've ever heard of has the 1 year walkthrough to button up those nail pops, the drywall seams or anything like that, and so they typically will coordinate that, but they're not necessarily going to coordinate a 5 year walkthrough. No. Right? You probably aren't going to hear from your builder on year 10 saying, "How's the foundation on that thing?" Right? That's up to you. Right? So those are things that make a note that those are things that I gotta, if I have this little thing that's bugging me about this thing, or that I'm wondering is this going to lead to a bigger issue with foundation or something like that, you're just going to have to keep track of when is that 10 year mark. And
a good way to be on top of those things is just as with existing construction, and as soon as you close, it is existing construction. Routine maintenance of the main systems of the home.
Yep.
Get your HVAC, your furnace, your air conditioning, get your water heaters looked at every now and again, so that if something is going on. We had a home that we helped some folks buy out in Chaska, built in 2019. The furnace was short cycling, and it's 2024, So they were
shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. So those things can happen. So it's a good idea to do that if possible.
Yep. And I think most of these systems, most of these modern HVAC systems, even down to windows and things like that, they will last a long time if you take care of them. Mm-hmm. Right? The lifespan that they give you, those can often go much, much further than what the manufacturer says, but they're probably taking into account that a good portion of people never would ever get it serviced. Yeah. And so they're like, yeah, okay, somewhere around there. But we see, a lot of furnaces, a high efficiency furnace, it'll say that, life expectancy is 15 years. I've seen 30 plus year old high efficiency furnaces, right? They do exist, and as long as you're taking really good care of them and treating them as such, they will last a long time.
Change the filters.
Think about it's like a car, right? Mm-hmm. Like I've seen 10-year-old cars that look tough, right? And I've seen 50-year-old cars that somehow are immaculate.
Well loved.
Yes. And so these responsibilities, they're going to fall on you, right? So just know that even though it's a new build, now it's yours to take care of. And just because these warranties exist, and there's as much of a 10-year warranty with structural problems, doesn't mean that a structural problem still isn't going to be a pain in your butt. In fact, it would be.
It's just like an extra staunch home warranty.
Yeah.
You still will have to deal with the issues if they do arise.
Yeah, or, imagine, okay, you have insurance for your car. Well, if your car gets totaled, that still is a pain in the butt. That's still a really big annoyance. Your credit card gets stolen. That doesn't mean that that's not going to still, even if you're covered and they don't take any of your money, it's still a pain. You got to do
major inconvenience.
Yeah, you got to do all this nonsense to get back on track. So now we kind of want to just dive into like what our roles look like, or our role looks like as real estate agents helping somebody navigate a new build. Because we've helped quite a few people do this, and we've had maybe a couple people who said, "Oh, I'm going to buy a new build, so I'm not going to use an agent." And we're like, okay, more power to you, and we wish you the best of luck, but we've seen people get burned.
We've heard back from some recently, actually.
That's actually why we started making this video, because we had somebody reach out to us who was really going through it with a builder.
A high-end builder.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't have any, representation. It was just up to them. So, yeah. some things are worth paying
Here we
for.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's possible for us to get paid by the builder. There's this idea that if you choose not to use a realtor and not to be represented by a realtor, that you're going to get a discount, that the builder's going to give you a discount.
Just more profit for them.
That's just not how it works. Yeah. They have that baked in most of the time. So you're just going to not have representation, unfortunately.
So a lot of people don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
That's just more to their overhead and profit.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, some of the stuff that we're doing when we're helping people buy a new build home, a lot of it is exactly the same as what we're helping people who are buying a pre-existing home, which, first of all, a lot of the folks we're helping, like I said earlier, are relocating, so they're living in a completely different place. And so any of the remote services that we're doing for somebody who is buying a pre-existing home, we're also doing that for new builds. So virtual showings, that's something we're doing all the time. I mean, probably more than showings in person. And so we've gotten very, very good at those things.
Extremely proficient and efficient.
It is our special sauce, I will say. It's something that we have focused on getting really, really good at. And so it looks a little different with a new build, a non-existent new build, especially, a to-be build. But nonetheless, then our virtual showings will typically become a little bit more of virtual showings of models of that builder, right? If you can't come out at all and you want to buy a new build, if you can't come to Minnesota, then we'll do virtual showings of model homes by that builder, so you can see craftsmanship, materials, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Show the fit and finish. And then if it's a builder that you like, you would move to the next step, which would be, we could be scoping out lots for you, taking some very detailed videos of the landscape. Is this going to be a walkout? Is this just going to be a standard basement? Is it going to be a lookout? Depending on the lot, where's the lot located? The surrounding neighborhoods. Backdrops, is it woods? Is it a runoff pond? These are all things that we like to point out for people.
Is it a highway?
They're all things that add to your enjoyment and comfort within the property, and then when it comes to resale, if and when. And
Nick mentioned sort of having an eye for materials and craftsmanship and things like that. And I really want to drill down on that. I think that's one of the most sort of like slept on ideas is quality of materials. Mm-hmm. I've seen, we said earlier, just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. I've seen some new builds where they are just so cheap, right? And it's one thing to have a very limited budget and like the idea of a new build, or maybe where you could end up in this new build, and being okay with, budget materials. But it's a different thing to buy a home in a neighborhood that supports higher end materials, but built by a builder who uses cheap materials. Some builders, I don't know, it's like they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes and go, it's got LVP floors. And you're like, well, sure, it's got the cheapest LVP floors that literally exist on the market. And there's a huge variety of those materials.
Absolutely.
And looking at a photo, you can't tell. A virtual showing, that's where we're kind of diving into those weird little nuances. How big is the trim, right? How big is the baseboard? Is it the little cheap window trim or door jamb trim where you're like, oh, that's almost like a cardboard, Those are the things that are, important to look at. Of course, the systems, who's the manufacturer of the HVAC and things like that. And knowing what things are really not worth sort of skimping on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think actually leads to the sort of the next step, which would be like, let's say you find a builder you like, you think you find a lot you like. Now it's sort of the like getting under contract phase of things.
Mm-hmm. Which always looks a little bit different with a new build, but we like to help with negotiations as far as lot premiums that might be involved. A lot of times they'll look for a pretty large amount of earnest money down. We've been able to talk that down a lot with builders, which is helpful. I mean, just allows you to kind of hold on to some of that money for a little bit longer.
Or make a move a little earlier, right? Yeah.
And also just kind of walking through one of the big things that builders are offering and is attractive to buyers as well is builder concessions. Sometimes it's a dollar amount. Sometimes it's a percentage.
Sometimes it's an appliance.
Yeah, or an appliance package.
Yeah.
And then also, other incentives that are only offered maybe with their in-house financing. And, there's all these things that need to be taken into consideration. What's best for you? We like to help talk you through that. And then again, advocate with you and for you when it comes to the negotiating table.
Yeah. And a lot of that is just kind of knowing what is reasonable to expect in a particular market. There are certain markets where you're not really going to get a concession. You getting the house is the win, them working with you is the win. I've actually had somebody back in 2021 where it was a lottery, and it was like calling a radio station to win tickets.
KW.
Yeah, it was the first 10 people to get through had a choice, and it was like you had a choice at lot and build, and it was like in the order you called. And so it was a bunch of us sat on the phone and waited until the time started, and then we called
draft
in.
day.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we got like a second choice, out of it. But like in that situation, you're not getting a concession.
Yeah,
they don't care. They have 50 people trying to call in just to get it. But as the market changes, then they're much more motivated, and you start to see them really showing their hand a little bit more of like, we would like to sell this. Yeah.
So once you're under contract, and this especially holds true for our remote buyers, is when we really become your liaison and acting as your proxy here in person throughout the entire process. And that it just will include, the selecting of materials, the multiple site visits, the communication with the project manager or the office manager. I've done plenty of both.
Yeah.
And just the consistent checking in on workmanship, reminding you throughout the process again that it is like baking a cake. Some things are going to look a little untidy throughout, but it's going to be okay. It's going to get there. And if it doesn't, then we're going to be there to advocate and make sure that it does.
Yeah, and I think it's it's easy to get defensive, right? Because you're buying a house and you think it should be perfect.
And new builds are expensive. Mm-hmm. Let's face it.
Yeah, you're spending a good chunk of money.
The median home price for a new build is pretty considerably higher than just the metro median in general.
For sure. And so there's certainly and understandably so. There's this kind of level of like, I think this should be perfect, And the truth is, houses aren't perfect, but it should be as close to perfect as possible.
Absolutely.
It should be buttoned up, and there should be a level of care involved in that stuff. And that's a lot of the role, is to make sure that level of care exists throughout the process, and that there's somebody, either held responsible for little errors, or somebody who's there to pick up after little messes and things like that, because there will be, there's a lot of contractors involved with a single home build, not to mention a whole
lot of different crews of subs.
Yeah, and so
there's a lot of communication, a lot of bodies going in and out.
Mm-hmm. And so, it's the project manager's job, and the builder's job to just make sure to hold those subs to a standard, right? You can't guarantee that one particular sub who's putting in an HVAC system is going to care at the same level as the builder. But the builder has to make sure that even if they didn't care, the quality is up to their standard.
Yeah,
and that's
through whatever means.
Yeah,
to maintain their reputation.
Exactly. Yeah, that could mean taking a hit financially.
Yeah, because the project manager and the office manager are not in there painting and nailing the trim.
No. Yeah, but quality control is a huge aspect of it.
Yes,
and I think that's a lot of the places that people are coming from where they're very averse to new build. There's just a pure lack of quality control.
Yeah.
And it gets kind of brutal. And then sort of a final thought on this, and it applies to our involvement, but just things to keep in mind, is I think it's really important to consider resale throughout the process. Even if you're building a custom home specific to you, if there is a chance that you're going to sell this thing at any point in your life, right, that it's not going to be the home that you and
inevitably you will sell it.
Yeah.
Even if you're rolling it into the family trust, someone's going to sell it at some point.
And so just keep in the idea of resale. And most people, statistically, even a new build, they're going to live in there probably 20 years or less, right?
Yeah, and so that's on the long end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's more like 7 to 10.
Yeah, statistically 7 years is when people move, but I think a lot of new builds are often closer to what people think of as forever home or raise a family home or whatever, right? A longer period of time that they intend to live there.
The idea is that you're having more input as to the specifications and all the stuff that we've gone through. But
so you don't have to move again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that said, there is a market, right? And your home will eventually have to be on the market. And so try not to pick overly specific finishes. If you have an idea that you would move in 5 to 7 years, I would say make sure that you're picking finishes that are going to appeal to other people, or be comfortable with not making as much money or having less equity or taking a loss.
Or spending the money to make it more appealing to a wider audience, or picking things that are specific that maybe are easy to undo, like peel and stick wallpaper in your powder room.
Yeah.
Also, we've seen properties where there's 2 bathrooms and they both have showers. There's no bathtub. These little things where it's like very specific.
Yeah, and a level of obsolescence, right? And those are things that we're very hyper aware of. We help a ton of buyers buy homes, so we have a good sense of what most people are looking for, how you could make a home as marketable as possible, right? There's kind of a wide audience that certain houses can have, and we'll be sure to at least protect you against. At least you would know if a certain decision might hurt resale, might hurt your potential audience, and which comes to things like basements, right? It's important for you to know that certain basement types have different sort of values, right? And you might look at a house and say, cool, that house sold for this, for X dollars, and it had a walkout basement, and you're buying a house that has maybe a completely underground basement with just windows.
Maybe like an egress window in one of the bedrooms, but just a finished full basement.
And just know that those are different assets.
Yeah.
That puts that in a completely different class of resale. That said, typically the walkout basement is the most desirable, the most sought after. Second after that would be the lookout basement, where you have a lot of daylight coming through but not necessarily a door. And then lastly would be the fully underground basement. And then there's also slab, right? There's found completely basementless homes. There's not that many of them in Minnesota.
Becoming more common for I don't know if I can say retirees.
Yeah.
People that are taking into consideration mobility more so than others would.
Yeah, aging in place and things like that, right? And so just know that these things are thought of as different asset classes. Even if it's built by the same builder and has really similar finishes, they're not perfect comps to each other if those things are different.
And even if you are spending maybe 5 to 10K more for a walkout, people look at that as more of a lower level versus a basement, and that home might move quicker than one that's 90% identical otherwise from the main level up on the same street.
And my personal opinion is that often you'll have a community that, let's say there's 30 homes being built in a smaller community, and there will be certain lots that have a lot premium. The premium, the prices can change pretty dramatically depending on what price point you're at. I personally think that the lot premium is almost always worth paying for a more long-term desirable lot.
Yeah, because they're charging those premiums on specific lots for a reason.
Yes.
Because they are more marketable.
Yeah.
It depends on who you ask, though. I've helped some folks that buy up in Andover, and they were stoked on one house in particular because it backed up to a large pond. Their kids were into hockey.
Yes.
They wanted to have that there. People that have infants maybe would be less stoked on that because it presents a potential hazard. There's all things to take into consideration.
But I would say for sure a house that backs up to a wooded lot is likely more valuable in that it is of more interest to people, as long as it has a usable backyard.
Yes.
Let's say a usable backyard and then some wooded area and some level of privacy, that is going to be long-term more valuable and sell at a higher comp price than the same exact house 3 houses down that looks directly at its neighbor, with no privacy in between, especially if there's you see houses where they're both up on a hill and there's just nothing in between them. Those are things worth considering, and often places where people will skimp out on price-wise, and I think those are some of the best money that could be spent.
I agree.
You can't move a house.
It's good value.
Yeah, it really is, and long-term play as well. But that's honestly, that's what we got. That's stuff that we think would be important for you to know when it comes to buying a new build. We enjoy helping people buy new builds. It actually can require more work for us, but we find it very, very fun, you know.
More visiting of the site for certain.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's a fun process to observe, even from afar, because like we said, we like to document that really well for you.
Yeah, and we think it's a very valuable thing for people. It's really important that you have somebody working on your behalf with that, because you're working with a pro. You're working. Your opposition is a builder who sells a lot of houses, probably.
And we've been told many times over, you know, it's been said as much by our clients that have worked with us that they're glad they did, and people who didn't, like we mentioned, that they wish they would have. We've heard from them actually kind of surprisingly down the road. So
yeah. So anyway, hope you've found this helpful. We'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.